Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is a very timely and important conversation. We are going to look at a review of the financial as well as investment landscape in Rwanda. Amongst other things, we're going to focus on Rwanda's goal to position itself as a financial and business hub across the continent. We're also going to look at the required financial skill sets to make this happen, as well as institutional coordination between relevant institutions to make this very ambitious goal that Rwanda has a reality. My name is Diana PC, host of The Square, and I'm very happy to welcome, I believe this is his first time here. We are joined by Nick Barije, who is the CEO of Rwanda Finance Limited. Nick, great to have you on The Square.
Thank you for having me, and good evening to everyone.
Thank you very much, Nick. Also joining us via Skype, we have Louise Kanyonga, who is the Chief Strategy and Compliance Officer at Rwanda Development Board. If we can have Louise on our screens. Louise, great to have you on The Square.
Thank you very much, Diana. Great to be joining you again.
Yes, again, always a pleasure to have you. Also on behalf of RDB, a constant, regular part of the show over the years. So, as we always do before we kick off, we're just going to quickly dive into a few midweek highlights from the resident panelists. And please allow me to introduce them. Berna Namata, resident panelist on The Square. We missed you. It's been a while.
I missed you too.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Great. Charles Saba, always a pleasure to have you on the show, Charles.
Let me, Adana, how are you?
Good.
Anna, how are you?
I'm good.
She was missing in action, huh?
Yes.
So, quick midweek highlights, Berna, from you.
There's a trial going on.
There's a what?
Trial
Yes.
going on.
The Russo Sabagina trial?
Yes, and it's only the local reporters that are currently covering it. And that tells us something. They need to invest in local journalism. You know, we tend to look at the foreign press and give them all the attention, but at the end of the day, you need local journalism. So I feel that we can do more, especially during this time, because most of them have really, I don't know how to describe it, but the pandemic has made it impossible for local journalism. So they need to reinvest in local journalism for the work they do. Yeah.
I agree. Charles, midweek highlight?
Yeah, again, extremely concerned that the COVID numbers are rising. Equally concerned that some of the cases are from people who are already vaccinated. So science is sort of being put to serious test here. But of course, it also means that I think, generally speaking, we have been a little bit lax in the way we've been observing our protocols and our SOPs and so on and so forth. But also, you know, whatever's happened, if you look at, for example, the recent cases and yesterday's announcement around locking up certain sectors of the country, it shows that the impact, you can easily read between the lines that the impact from the DRC and Uganda is hitting us a little bit hard. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's quite sobering. So thank you very much for the midweek highlights, Charles and Berna. And I'd like to thank our guests once more, Nick Barije from Rwanda Finance Limited and Louise Kanyonga from Rwanda Development Board. And the first question I want us to just, briefly, talk about, just for an overview, and it's directed at you, Nick, is the financial landscape in Rwanda. Like I said earlier on, Rwanda has this ambitious goal to position itself as a financial and business hub, continentally speaking. And of course, this is being done by way of the newly created Kigali International Finance Center, which operates under Rwanda Finance Limited, of which you're CEO and here with us today. And the center is designed, amongst other things, to promote inward investment and the creation of thousands of highly skilled financial sector jobs for the benefit of Rwanda and the African continent. So, Nick, if you could just kick off this conversation by just telling us briefly what are the current gains made by the Kigali International Finance Center, through under the guidance of Rwanda Finance Limited. If you could just start with some of the gains, achievements made thus far, and then we can move on later on to some of the challenges you expect and how you expect to overcome these challenges. Over to you, Nick.
Now, when we look at the role of Rwanda Finance, which is to develop and promote Kigali International Financial Center, our core activities are divided into a number of activities. One, it's policy advocacy in terms of how do we create a business environment that is conducive and attractive, a business environment that is transparent and compliant to international standards. Now, in terms of successes, what has been done over the last 18 months, in terms of policy, we now have around 8 legislations that have been enacted. We have 8 additional legislations that are being discussed in Parliament. And these are legislations that are extremely important. Case in point is the newly amended Investment Promotion and Facilitation Law, which has sector-specific incentives, and including incentives that are targeting the investors that we are attracting under Kigali International Financial Center. So those are very important milestones. Now, additional to that is the other activity that we are responsible for, which is promotion, has called for us to form key strategic partnerships. We recently joined the World Alliance of International Financial Centers. We are now members of Financial Centers for Sustainability. We have signed strategic partnerships with Casablanca Financial City Authority, with Belgian Financial Center, and with Jersey Finance. Again, these strategic partnerships are important for a couple of reasons. They allow us to benchmark best practices, allow us to build capacities within Rwanda Finance and within the ecosystem. And then most importantly, also attracting and onboarding investors. We've had successes such as RH Bopelo, the first cross-listing that we have on the Rwanda Stock Exchange outside the ESC. This is a company that is listed on Johannesburg Stock Exchange, as well as the Rwanda Stock Exchange. We have investors that have set up funds, fund structures, targeting key sectors such as education. So these are some of the successes that we see and give us the impetus to know that there is more to do, but we have a strong platform to build on.
Thank you very much, Nick. Just very quickly, on behalf of viewers, but also myself, this has been all set up in 18 months. It sounds extremely, it's quite admirable. It's no mean feat. And I just want to know if you could give us a sort of background, because the speed at which, some of these gains that you're talking about have been made in less than 2 years, the partnerships, the sort of legislative, the reforms that you're already onboarding. Could you give us a brief background that enabled Kigali International Finance Center, rather Rwanda Finance Limited, be able to make these gains in this short amount of time?
It's fact that Kigali International Financial Center has been one of the priority projects, both within EDPRS 2 and within the National Strategy for Transformation. So there is groundwork that had been done, led by the Ministry of Finance. And as a result of that, we have stakeholders both in government as well as in private that have really come together to ensure that this is, one, it's a national priority project, and it calls for all hands on deck, so I would say. So, for example, when we are doing legislative enactment, we bring together technical teams from Rwanda Bar Association, from the Rwanda Bankers Association, from Rwanda Development Board, Prime Minister's Office, and other relevant stakeholders. So this has enabled us to be able to marshal all the expertise required for the fact that this is a priority project that we believe contributes to the national vision, which is Vision 2050 now. So that's what I would attribute to why we are seeing groundwork, one, has been laid, but also the fact that all stakeholders are coming together and we are working very collaboratively to achieve what we've been able to attain thus far.
Thank you very much, Nick. Before we go to Louise, like you rightly talked about investment, we'd like to hear more from that. I would like just to, give way to my resident panelists to just share, commentary on what you've said. Charles, I'll kick off with you.
I mean, obviously, it's exciting times. It's exciting times that we're stepping into the Kigali International Finance Center, and whereas Nick speaks to the opportunities around the center itself and the ecosystem, when I put on my real estate hat, I would also like to speak to what it means for the CBD and the infrastructure that's going to be built around it. So historically, the CBD has been, I'd say, relatively quiet, because with the exception of the banks themselves, I think there's only one bank that has two banks that have their head offices out of the CBD. The rest are in there. You have Central Bank, you have the City of Kigali and Ministry of Finance, and then the rest is for traders. So that has put a lot of strain on real estate and real estate opportunities, but there's an iconic building in which the Kigali International Finance Center is going to be housed. That will be in CBD, and that will be a total game changer. So I think that's a totally different opportunity that presents itself. But I also want to talk about an opportunity around a concept that has been proven in Rwanda around one-stop centers. So by virtue of the fact that you have the RDB one-stop center, irrespective of some of the challenges they may have, but there is credit deserves to go to them. At one of the most successful ones, the Kigali City one-stop center, and that's doing fairly well. So with the financial center, by virtue of the fact that anyone around the financial space, financial services space, is going to be housed under one roof, capital markets, central bank regulation, whoever is that specific unit that there is in there, Rwanda Stock Exchange, the Rwanda Finance Company, everything under one roof, it will make things a lot easier. Yeah.
Verna?
I think they've done quite well. And I think they're quite bold, because if you look at the work they've been doing over the last couple of months, they've been working throughout the pandemic. Some projects stopped when the pandemic came in, but they've managed to pull through. So I think the team deserves a pat on the back for that. They are quite ambitious. And then also we are seeing, of course, the legislation. The ordinary people may not know where the legislation is coming from, like even with, there was one around, of course, the investment code, but also we saw around the banking. I don't remember the exact title of the law, but we have amendments coming up. So it is good to see this happening, because it lays the ground for investment. Now, if we look at how you measure competitiveness of a destination as a financial center, one, the business environment. We know that a lot of work has already been going into that. RDB has been spearheading that. If you look at Rwanda's ranking in terms of business environment, it's the best. I think second in Africa. Yes, so it's doing very well. If you look at infrastructure, again, around the index, not so well, but there's progress there. The other issue, I think, is financial sector involvement. There's a lot of work going into that. As he mentioned, there are a lot of stakeholders, and we know, if you look at what the central bank has been doing, because regulation is very important for the financial sector. We had a bit of resistance, I think, when the central bank was coming in with some of these regulations. There was a bit of pushback from the banks, for instance, around their capital requirements. But we have seen, for instance, with the pandemic, that the same banks are benefiting from the increments in the capital requirements. Yeah. So there's a lot that is going on, and they've done very well, but I think they're coming into a space that is extremely competitive, because Kigali will be competing with New York, It will be competing with London. It will be competing with
Africa, South Africa, and
I think if you look at the positioning of the center,
Mauritius.
yes, the positioning of the center is global. So I won't worry. They want to attract African investors, but again, they are competing. You want to attract capital from all over the world. Yeah. So it's going to be much more difficult how you attract the real wealth and money that you want, because you're competing with people who are already in this space and have already been ranked, for instance, because if you look at the rankings, you have Mauritius there, you have Johannesburg, you have Nairobi, quite at the bottom, so there's competition. But of course, with the groundwork that is happening now, I'm sure they can get there, because all it takes is, as we have seen with the ease of doing business ranking, if you have people that are consistent in terms of implementing reforms, it is easy to make headway.
We've all come to this, next point of the conversation, which is to do with investment. You're asking, how is this going to be done? How are we going to attract these, the wealth that you just talked about, all these, foreign investors and that sort of thing. So, of course, in order to make this vision of being a hub a reality, and this is where I want to go to Louise from RDB, Rwanda needs to attract more international players, of course, including renowned banks, insurance companies, investment funds, and that sort of thing. So, Louise, if you could just tell us, in terms of institutional coordination, how is Rwanda Development Board working with Rwanda Finance and other relevant institutions to kind of streamline this process and make Rwanda's investment environment more competitive, if we're really looking at being a financial and business hub? Over to you, Louise.
Thank you very much, Diana, and I think Nick really did a fantastic job of setting, the scene as to where we've been able to take the center so far. I do apologize. I have a cold. I assure you it's not COVID, but I hope I'm coming across clearly. But yes, I think this, as you've all rightly said, this really comes off of the back of a very consistent, bold, and and very, I guess, coherent process over the last, 2 decades and more of making sure that we have the right kind of investment climate and environment in place. And then, so if you've laid the ground, and this is something that was really very, very critical for Rwanda's leadership in understanding that, if we are going to have sustainable growth, sustainable development, it can only be done when the private sector is at the heart and center of that. So coming from that vision of the leadership, you then really see the same thread coming through with the Kigali International Financial Center, which I think one of the biggest successes that one of the biggest factors for it being where it is today is a very clear visioning and positioning, right? So we looked at and approached it from, I guess, the usual way that Rwanda does things is, that unique blend between looking at what's the global best practice and how do we take that and adapt it locally. And so what we've done is, rather than having sort of like a designated, localized kind of special economic zone where you have, special laws and special kinds of registration, what we do, and working very closely with the Rwanda Finance Limited, is rather to have an attractive ecosystem, right? So all these different things that you're talking about, from the regulation, the regulatory framework, to the infrastructure that you need, the stability, the safety, the connectivity in terms of how easy it is to get here, and so on. Is what we really package together and have the KIFC coming as that strong sort of brand and marketing agency that then attracts players into the space. And so really our role as RDB and how we work closely with the Rwanda Finance Limited is to just consistently keep that environment attractive. We've all spoken about how absolutely critical this environment, the regulatory environment, the doing business environment is for people who are coming into the financial sector space, as Ben has rightly said, very competitive. What will set you apart is how streamlined, how efficient your regulations are, how compliant you are, and also at the same time how dynamic you are in terms of being able to quickly adapt and change that regulatory framework as is needed. And so we've led, together with the Rwanda Finance Limited, on putting in place all these different laws and regulations that are needed. I think at the very forefront of this being the investment code, where we really did have to put very attractive incentives, very specific and very targeted to the financial sector, even just putting in place certain institutional entities that we did not have and which are very critical for players who are coming into the space. You know, things like making sure you're able to set up a partnership, a trust, a collective, investment scheme. We didn't really have these kind of entities within our legal framework, and so we've been working very closely with them to have that. Another area which we probably might, will need to unpack is working with the Rwanda Finance Limited and other actors in this space to really look critically at the ecosystem that is needed to make this thrive. And I think Charles touched on it. You know, when you look at things like what's the kind of high-end or world-class infrastructure that we need in terms of commercial, even residential real estate. What kind of skills do we need to put in place to make sure that we're fully leveraging the regional and the global opportunities that this center brings. So we're working with the Rwanda Finance Limited on really making sure that we also fully develop that ecosystem that is needed for the center to thrive. And then obviously one other thing that I think is fairly obvious is that because of the strong synergies between the International Financial Center, the Kigali International Financial Center, and RDB's mandates, we do a lot of joint promotion work. So at every stage where we are promoting the opportunities for investment in Rwanda, the Kigali International Financial Center is really forefront of those promotion efforts. So there's lots that we do together. This is really one of our core projects that we do promote for investment into the country, and one that will continue to be a priority even going forward. And I'm hoping that we can unpack a few of these areas as we go along in the conversation. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thank you for joining us in spite of the cold that you have. I think you did a fantastic job just sharing with us this sort of institutional coordination between RDB and Rwanda Finance Limited, as well as also the other key players that are here to make this very ambitious goal a reality. I'd like to just go back to Nick, just to hear what he has to say before we move to the next part of the conversation. Nick, if you'd want to just weigh in on what Charles, Berna, and Louise have also said, please go ahead.
My message is more to our audience. When we talk about Kigali International Financial Center, it's very important to clarify that we are not only looking at foreign investors, but also looking at local business. I love cows, so you'll pardon me making a reference to cows. I think we have a saying in Kinyarwanda that ija kurishi hera kurugo. If the cow is going to graze, starts from pastures near home. So at Kigali International Financial Center, when you're looking at what it is that we are promoting, a couple of things that we want to call out. One, are holding structures. And this is specific and of interest to our local businesses. We know there are multiple entrepreneurs, there are local companies that are invested into different business streams, real estate, manufacturing, name it. So the value proposition is to them, why don't you consolidate your business activities under a holding structure now that we have targeted incentives that address that? So I want to make that clear. Two is global trading. I've been seeing through the private sector federation, local business communities traveling to Central African Republic, going to DRC. So we are saying, we want to say to them that you can do global trading in Rwanda and serve different markets outside Rwanda. You can, to our fintechs, you can, through the proof of concept, you can initiate your project in Rwanda and be able to go outside Rwanda. So it shouldn't be seen that Kigali International Financial Center is only looking to attract foreign investments. It's also meant for local businesses, local financial intermediaries, local law firms, tax advisors, accountants. It's meant for that. That's the addition that I wanted to make.
Thanks for that addition and clarification. And just very quickly, would the same incentives that apply to, sort of foreign investors, would it apply to also local investors? All these incentives and, favorable tax regimes that you and Louise are alluding to, is it the same?
Absolutely. They apply to both local and foreign investors.
Okay. Charles Brenner, would you like to add on?
Yeah, I think I want to take on from the last bit that Nick mentioned around the local content, and I have a particular bone of contention to pick on this.
Of course you do. The show would not be complete without that.
And this has nothing at all to do with RDB. It has nothing at all to do with KIFC. It's us in the private sector, and how ready we are for this. But, and not only in the private sector, in the public sector, basically the entire ecosystem, how ready the entire ecosystem is for this big thing, this big wave that is already hitting us. And I will speak to 2 or 3 things. One is around our informality and lack of sophistication. So you have deals that are done at a private sector level, and I'll just drop a wild example like the Chic Complex or Meek or this group of investors called Catch Up who own almost half of Kigali, and a lot of money is pumped into the economy through these investment groups, but their levels of informality are extremely alarming. Then you will come across a very senior government official who is very happy to ignore your email and send a WhatsApp message or a text message and think that's all right. So both in the public and private sector, I don't see that we are really ready for what is going to hit us. And that's, I've just given an example of communication to rub in my point around informality. But I'll also go into sophistication and talk about our financial sector. Nick talks about funds. He talks about when you talk about it, he referred to RH Bopelo as one of the examples of a cross-listed company. When you're attracting such a caliber of investors into your space, they are used to dealing with investment bankers. They are used to dealing with loan officers in commercial banks who understand a certain way of doing things and language. In the event that we are only doing transactions in our banking sector in the old traditional way of show me your valuation, I discount your cash flows, and the level, and I think Nick, being the government sort of person that he is, he has been a little bit cagey with his words around everyone else who must come on board, the lawyers and what have you. The point I'm really raising, Diana and Bana, is that I think we still have a lot to do in terms of our sophistication across the entire value chain. Whether it is at RDB, whether it is private lawyers, whether it is people even in the real estate trade, whether it is lenders and the banking sector, yes.
Totally agree with you, Charles. I think we definitely need a more professional approach, especially in this in the financial sector. If we are, like you said, it's already here, if we are to embrace this vision of becoming a financial hub.
Sorry, just before you move on, and I want to give a practical example of something that has already hit us that we are not ready for, and that is in the sports infrastructure space. We've hosted BAL, In a few days' time, we are hosting Kigali Peace Marathon. A few months down the road, we'll host Afrobasket. We're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in expanding Amahoro Stadium. Now, if you're to take BAL as an example, how many local service providers did we have at that event? So I received a text message from somebody who asked me that, and it's a very seasoned hotelier or somebody in the hospitality space, very seasoned. In the local, back to Nick's point around local content. And this guy asked me, I hear Shelton is coming, and that's exactly how he spelled it. S-H-E-L-T-O-N-I, I think. Yes.
Is this supposed to be Sheraton?
Yes, I figured out that he meant Sheraton. So, and he's a very seasoned person. So I asked myself, okay, I appreciate that you have only worked within our space, but do you know that we have the Kigali Arena? Do you know that we have the Kigali International Finance Center? Do you know that the 4 Points by Sheraton is actually coming into the market? So how ready are we for this huge thing that is going to hit us?
And that will take us to the next part of the conversation, which is to do with skill sets.
Yes.
But I know you're talking about just not even the skill sets, being able to absorb these opportunities. Brenna, over to you.
I like that Nick emphasized local content, and I hope it will begin with our pension fund. Bring the money that is in New York, that is in London, bring it, invest it here. Because we know for a very long time that African pension funds prefer to invest outside. Now we know that the rules of investment are where there's return, the higher the return, that's where you put the money. But for the strategic objective of developing our financial sector, we need to see our pension fund bringing back that money. That's number one. Number two, I feel that what Charlie has just described is what we really need is the mindset change, for people to understand that there's an opportunity for everyone actually to be part of the financial center. So it's not just people with money, but as a professional, for instance, I know we'll talk about human capital, you should be looking out, where is the opportunity for me? If you are an accountant, if you are in insurance, if you are looking to manage investments, there are several opportunities, and especially young people, because where we are today, if you sit and wait for them to do all the work they have to do with legislation, and then, I'm sorry to say, but we'll have foreigners come and take all the jobs, and still we'll find that the local content is missing. So until we take time, personal initiative, and get interested in what they're doing, and say, where is the opportunity for me? It will not happen in terms of local content.
I would like to just go, with the few minutes that we're left with, to the next part of the conversation, which is, it echoes what Charles has said, it echoes what Brenna, you've said, and it's to do with local content, with local expertise, with human resources in Rwanda. So, of course, beyond favorable tax regimes and different incentives that you've mentioned, Louise and Nick, we need to develop further highly skilled human resources in the financial sector to take on these opportunities being brought about by KFC and RFL. And my question to you is, not only RDB and RFL, but if you could explain what are we doing in this space to ensure that we really are going to invest in promoting skill sets in the financial sector to ensure that we can really become a financial hub. Louise, I'll start with you on behalf of RDB.
Diana. I just want to first assure Bernard that developing our local content is not a strategic, political imperative. It's good business, actually. We've seen very clearly from RDB that if you do not have good domestic farms, you're not going to attract the big ones either, because they want to see that you're succeeding locally, that things are actually happening on ground before they can bring the big money in. So it's just all around a good business decision for us, and we're really focusing on that. And that, I think, ties in very well also with the skills that we need. I think rightly said, that's really one of our major pressure points, is how do we quickly amass the skills that are needed. Now, this obviously, because of the nature or the size of the challenge, means that we have to pursue multiple options at the same time, some of which are more of an immediate fix and some which are looking at the longer term horizon. And in the shorter term fixes, one of the things that we're working very closely with the Rwanda Finance Limited is to put in place something that we're calling a Financial Sector Skills Council, where we rapidly onboard the private sector to give us a sense of what are the needs that are here, and how do we partner with you to shift everything that needs to be shifted to create the skills rapidly. This means everything from if we're changing curriculum, if we're coming up with internship and training programs, how do we identify the needs, etc. So this is really a very hands-on council that brings together private sector, brings together government, all the relevant people together in one sort of institutional framework, and is consistently looking at whether the skills that we're looking at and the initiatives that they're developing are working. Another short-term initiative is obviously we're bringing in these sophisticated firms and transactions, as Charles said. Some of these things are happening now. We don't have the time to wait until skills are built. And so we're looking at, obviously, how do we import some of this talent? And a very obvious starting point for us is our Rwandan diaspora. And so we're working closely. Nick will probably speak about this. But from RDB, we, through our Chief Skills Office, also have a very proactive partnership with LinkedIn, where we're trying to target, Rwandan diaspora that is out there. And then we also have several other investors that we bring into the space. I think this is probably what RDB contributes most significantly, is bringing in players that are actually going to contribute to the development of skills. So you've heard of things like Andela, which is looking at bringing in IT skills. We know that, finance and IT completely correlated. Things like Noshken and the Alan and Jill Gray philanthropy that are now building the kind of SMEs and businesses that will be able to absorb the opportunities that come from the financial sector, and lots more. But Diana, I think I'll stop there for now, and Nick will probably complement on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Louise. Over to you, Nick.
First off, when you look at the most recent labor survey, the financial services sector currently employs around 38,500 people. When we look at the skills that we need within the Kigali International Financial Center, if you are doing a comparative analysis, currently, when you look at Mauritius, for example, for every around 650 people, it's one accountant. That's the ratio. When you look at Singapore, it's for every 190 people, it's one accountant. In Rwanda, the ratio is 18,000 to 1. That should give you the challenge that we have in terms of the skills that we need within the financial services sector. Now, the work that we do requires us to benchmark on how have others addressed it. Both Singapore and Mauritius have a sector skills council. So that's why in terms of the structural reforms that we are working on is to establish a sector skills council that will lead into us having a sector skills fund that will have contribution of both public and private, because we need commitment of funds to be able to upskill, to be able to have continuous professional development. But in the short term, we have so far the International Compliance Association that has started giving targeted short-term training courses. We are working with the Luxembourg House of Training that is offering short-term targeted training. The Rwanda Bankers Association now has the Rwanda Finance Academy that is looking to address the skills gaps within the banking sector. This morning I was privileged to attend a meeting with the governor, and the governor was calling out that within insurance, because of lack of actuarialists. The Central Bank of Rwanda is committing to be training 2 to 4 people per year as actuarialists. So what can we do combined as a sector? So that's why the Sector Skills Council, the Skills Levy become very important, because without those, then not much is going to be done. So I believe that the starting point is to have structural reforms and have commitment of both public and private committing to building our skills base, because we are coming from a very low base. Now, there's something that I feel Haba spoke to. We are also looking to attract expertise that we don't have. At the moment, Haba is correct, we don't have investment banking. Now, we believe that that's within our pipeline. I can't get into details, but we have applications for investment banking. We have applications for fund administration and fund management. But those will also need local talent to work with. So that's why, again, the Sector Skills Council becomes extremely important.
Thank you very much, Nick, especially with regards to the ratio you gave. It's really eye-opening. You know, one accountant serving 18,000 people compared to others where it's just below 1,000, other countries like you mentioned. So there's clearly a lot of work to do. Just before we go to our Twitter feed and just hear from some of our viewers, I just want to know if Charles or Brenna, is there something you want to add? Brenna?
Yeah, on the skills, on the human development, I feel that the journalists should not be left out. You really need business journalists. You need media that is focused on reporting what is happening in the financial sector. And I feel,
analytical.
Yes, and I feel quite often it is overlooked. And people only remember about developing skills only when they have events and call for press conferences and people to cover the event. And when they look at the coverage, it doesn't meet the required standards. So I hope that business journalism, financial journalism, reporting will be prioritized along the way.
I agree. Charles?
Yeah, I mean, the opportunities, and I'm glad that Nick has really pointed this out, the opportunities that are being portrayed before us are extremely enormous. And I believe also on the part of whether it is RDB or the Kigali, I think it's Rwanda Finance Company, I stand to be corrected.
Rwanda Finance Limited.
Rwanda Finance Limited, thanks. Is that there's also a huge necessity to really up their game. You know, it should not be business as usual. I've attracted them. There are 100 investors. There are 100 opportunities. But what is the quality of some of the deals that we have in the country that these people who are interested in joining the International Finance Center, either as investment bankers or fund managers or funds of funds, and so on and so forth, are looking at? You know, if we are talking about being extremely sophisticated to set up real estate investment trusts, how ready is our secondary mortgage market, for example, to be able to, you know, you can't talk about a REIT without a secondary mortgage market. If you're talking about, he gave an example of, I think, Arich Bopelo, who are in the medical space. And back to Nick's example around the insurance sector. How sophisticated is our medical insurance sector that the likes of RH Bopelo are going to come into the market and not walk away bleeding because of the amount of money they've lost in our market? So that, again, the opportunities are there, but we have to carefully think about the entire ecosystem at the risk of repeating myself. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Charles. So the first tweet that we have coming in is, if you could have that on our screens, and I think we've more or less covered what this person is asking. And Dale asks, the Square collaboration between RDB Rwanda and Kigali IFC is visible and felt especially during the process of onboarding new investors. How about with Rwanda Revenue Authority or the National Bank of Rwanda? The guests could touch on institutional coordination amongst those actors. I know we've already spoken of this, but I'll just briefly give way to Louise and Nick to touch on this. We have another quick tweet coming in And Alice is asking a quick question. Can you please explain the difference between Kigali International Finance Center and Rwanda Finance Limited? Also, how does Kigali International Finance Center work or complement RDB's Rwanda's work and mission? I think we've also explained this, but Nick, again, you'll also have a chance to break down or clarify the difference between these two. We also have another tweet coming in from David Butera, who says, how is Kigali International Finance Center aligned with other government of Rwanda initiatives like Kigali Innovation City? Are we only looking at traditional finance products? Will Kigali International Finance Center incentives be open to financial products that are disruptive, in quotes, to the status quo? We have a couple of more tweets coming in, but I'd just like for our guests to answer that. And I'll start off with you, Nick, before going over to Louise. Difference between KFC and Rwanda Finance Limited, as well as the last tweet we had from David regarding, sort of disruptions to this sector. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you. Rwanda Finance is an agency that is developing and promoting Kigali International Financial Center. It's about positioning Rwanda as a Pan-African hub that is serving both trade and investments. Kigali International Financial Center is an ecosystem that brings together financial actors and financial intermediaries. This means banks, it means insurance companies, it means tax advisors, it means lawyers. That's what Kigali International Financial Center is. So Rwanda Finance Limited, it's about the development and promotion. Now to the question that is being asked, what's the relationship between Rwanda Finance and RDB? So the relationship is very, very collaborative because we are all working towards creating an environment that is conducive for doing business. As Louise mentioned, be it in skills and capacity development, be it in the legal reforms that we are doing, the process is very, very collaborative. When we are doing road shows, when we are engaging with investors, we work very collaboratively. The only distinction I would say is that Rwanda Finance is sector specific to the financial services sector. That's really the difference. But the whole approach is very collaborative. Now, what was asked about Rwanda Revenue and the National Bank of Rwanda. Again, this is that entire ecosystem. We have tax incentives that have been developed that are attractive for both local and international investors that are being attracted. When it comes to tax administration, that's the mandate of Rwanda Revenue. Have they been consulted? Absolutely. Have they been part of this reform process that we are doing? Absolutely. The National Bank of Rwanda and the Capital Markets Authority are regulators, but they have also been and continue to be part of this process of creating an environment that is conducive. When we are pitching, we are saying that the value proposition of Kigali International Financial Center is centered around three things. One, it's about compliance and transparency. That's why we have laws that are benchmarked to international standards. Second, it's about our Pan-African connectivity, and I feel that also speaks to the question that was asked by David Butera. The work that we are doing is complementary to the work that is being done about making Rwanda as the MICE strategy. It's complementary to the work that is being done of developing Bugesera Airport. It's complementary to the work that is being done under Kigali Innovation City. So it's really looking at all these initiatives that the government of Rwanda has been undertaking and say, how do we connect? We have opportunities, but you also need funding. So how do we create avenues of funding the different initiatives that are being undertaken?
Thank you very much, Nick. I would like us to just go to Louise and hear what she also has to say on the matter. Over to you, Louise.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Diana. So I think those are all great questions, but maybe speaking just to the collaboration with other players in this space, like the central bank or the Rwanda Revenue Authority. I think Nick mentioned this, and this is something that I think is really one of the levers of success for Rwanda, is that once we do have something that is identified as a priority, there is strong political will around it, and all the key institutions rally around, making sure that we are able to attain the objectives that we've set out. And so even, I think for the Rwanda Revenue Authority, here you're really talking about, the tax incentives that we're putting in place, as well as any other types of facilitation for the sector. These are things that the Rwanda Revenue Authority has been fully on board with, in the understanding that the financial sector really does need to be prioritized. If anything, they've been a little bit too generous, and we hope that this would expand to other sectors of priority for the government. But there's been, it's one of the sectors where we're going to see a lot of alignment and a lot of support from all the key stakeholders, and specifically around, looking at how do we make it easy for people to transact, how do we remove unnecessary bureaucracy, unnecessary transactional costs, but also how do we make sure we're giving you incentives that will either, bring your cost drivers down, or that will make you choose Rwanda over any other destination. And so we're fully on board. Central Bank as well, I think, is one of the most progressive, regulators that you will find in the region. They're very, very quick to adapt to modern, transactions and modern types of structures. A very digital central bank as well. But they're also actually one of the key players that are actually leading some of these regulatory reforms for the Kigali International Financial Center that Nick mentioned. So all of these organizations are actually at the front and center of this process that we're conducting or putting in place the most conducive environment possible for the sector to really take off. And then maybe just coming to the question that was asked around, are we looking at incentivizing just traditional financial products, or are we really looking at the synergies between innovation and the opportunities that it presents to positively disrupt the financial sector? Absolutely, this is something that I think we touched on earlier. We do see that there are very strong correlations between finance and innovation, and these are actually things that this correlation has existed for quite some time now. This is not something new, but I think we're just looking at a much faster scale, of digitization coming into the space, and so we do have lots of incentives that would go towards encouraging innovation, so that innovation is an enabler. It cuts across all these different sectors. And so once we have those incentives in place, inevitably it will play a big role in the financial sector. And maybe one thing to say is that I think, again, another thing that sets Rwanda apart is how agile, we are to be able to rapidly incentivize, disruption, and how, I guess, willing we are to embrace disruption and quickly even be able to put in place sandbox regulations and incentives that would, specifically target the disruptions that we're looking at. And so we've even built these laws, especially the investment code, with very flexible mechanisms to be able to onboard new incentives for emerging sectors as well. I think that's what I'd probably add to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. I especially like how you talk about how agile the environment is to even give incentive to some of these disruptive, inroads. Thank you very much to our guests, Louise. Thank you very much for coming through, even with your cold, making time to be part of this very informative, very important conversation. Thank you very much, Louise, all the way from RDB. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Always a pleasure to be here.
Also, thank you, Nick. Very, very happy to have you here. I hope this won't be your last time. Hopefully we'll have you here, 2 or 3 times, because this is a very important conversation, especially if we really want to shed more light on this very ambitious and very important project. So thank you very much, Nick, for coming on behalf of Rwanda Finance Limited and Kigali International Finance Center.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and for sure, I hope this is the first of the many to come.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Nick. Charles Benner, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Great to hear from your inputs, especially when it comes to, talking about the local population. You know, Charles, you're talking about the value chain, the entire ecosystem. Bernard, you know, just referring to we need to also have resources when it comes to reporting, analytical reporting on some of the many inroads this hub is going to bring in. To our viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. Please keep the conversation going using #TheSquareRW. There's lots more tweets coming in, but we don't have time to read them. But thank you very much for sharing your questions and your suggestions with us. And to our partners, Uzi Collection and Bourbon Coffee, thank you for always partnering with The Square. Have a good night. See you all again next week. Thank you.